Kenny had worked hard to buy his dream home, a quiet place with a beautiful backyard and a sparkling blue pool. It was his favorite spot to relax, especially after long days at work. But his peaceful life took a turn when a woman from the neighborhood, later known as Karen, started showing up uninvited. At first, Kenny thought it was just a mistake. Maybe she was lost? But that hope faded when she confidently marched into his backyard, dipped her feet in his pool, and made herself comfortable on one of his lounge chairs, like she owned the place. "Wow," she said, looking around. "I didn't think people like you lived in houses like this." Kenny froze. He knew exactly what she meant by people like you. He was black, and she clearly didn't think he belonged in such a nice home. Still, he tried to be polite. "This is private property," he said calmly. "You need to leave." Karen laughed. "Oh, relax. The community should be for everyone. You don't mind sharing, do you?" Kenny did mind. This was his home, his safe space. But Karen wasn't listening. She waved him off like he was an annoying fly and stayed right where she was. Day after day, Karen kept coming back. And each time, she got bolder. She brought snacks, acted like she was hosting a pool party, and even called over a friend once, without asking. Then, one afternoon, she took things too far. Kenny was watering his plants when she arrived, wearing sunglasses and a smug smile. "You know," she said, "people like you should be grateful. Back in the day, you'd be serving people like me, not owning homes." Kenny's hands tightened around the hose. His heart pounded. Did she really just say that? "Get out," he said, his voice steady but firm. Karen sighed, rolling her eyes. "Fine. But you can't keep me out forever." Kenny knew this wasn't over. After that day, Karen made it her mission to make Kenny's life miserable. She stopped pretending to be friendly and became openly hostile. One afternoon, Kenny found her in his backyard again, this time, fully stretched out on one of his pool chairs, sunglasses on, looking completely at home. "Didn't I tell you to stay out?" Kenny said, trying to stay calm. Karen smirked. "Oh, relax. I'm just cooling off. You should be honored to have me here." Kenny was beyond frustrated. He had told her to leave, yet she ignored him every time. He even tried calling the police, but when they arrived, Karen played the victim. "He's threatening me," she cried, putting on fake tears. "I'm just a harmless woman trying to enjoy some sunshine, and he's making me feel unsafe." The officers exchanged glances. Kenny, standing there with his arms crossed, clearly hadn't done anything. But they couldn't force Karen to do more than leave. "Ma'am, you need to go," one of them finally said. Karen scoffed, grabbing her bag. But as she walked away, she turned back with a smirk. "This isn't over," she muttered. Kenny clenched his jaw. He needed a plan, something that would make her stay out for good. Kenny knew that playing by the rules wasn't going to work. He had tried being calm and respectful, but Karen just wouldn't stop. The more he told her to leave, the more entitled she acted. Now, it was time to take matters into his own hands. But he didn't want to cause any trouble. He wanted something that would make her leave him alone, without breaking the law. He remembered hearing about something called itch powder from a friend who worked in a prank shop. It was a harmless but irritating powder that caused itching and discomfort. Perfect, Kenny thought. It wasn't dangerous, but it would definitely make Karen think twice about using his pool again. Late that evening, when Karen was nowhere to be found, Kenny headed to the local prank store. The shop had all sorts of fun products: fake spiders, whoopee cushions, and, of course, the itch powder. It was exactly what he needed. He grabbed a small bag and paid quickly. No time to waste. The next night, with the neighborhood quiet and dark, Kenny made his move. He knew Karen had a habit of showing up early in the morning, so he had to act fast. With the bag of itch powder in hand, he snuck out to the pool and carefully sprinkled the powder into the water. It dissolved almost immediately, leaving no trace. If Karen took a dip tomorrow, she wouldn't even know what hit her. Kenny stepped back and admired his work. He didn't want to hurt Karen. He just wanted her to finally feel what it was like to be uncomfortable in his space. He made sure everything was as it should be before heading back inside and keeping a watchful eye from his window. The next morning, he saw her. Just like clockwork, Karen showed up again. She slipped through the gate, walked over to the pool, and without any hesitation, started slipping off her sandals. Kenny felt a little nervous. This was the moment. He watched as she dipped her feet into the pool, then slowly eased herself in like it was any other day. Karen stretched out on a pool chair, enjoying the sun. She was completely oblivious to the powder that was now working its magic. Kenny leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the scene. He couldn't help but feel a little bit of excitement. Today, she was going to learn what happens when you push someone too far. At first, Karen seemed perfectly fine, basking in the sun and enjoying her swim. But after a few minutes, things started to change. Kenny could see her squirming a little on the lounge chair, scratching her arm. He thought maybe it's just the heat. But then, she scratched again, this time, harder. Within 10 minutes, her discomfort turned into full-blown panic. Karen stood up quickly and began to scratch all over her body. Her arms, legs, and neck were turning red, as if she was having some sort of allergic reaction. She started frantically pacing around the pool, her hands desperately trying to relieve the itching that was growing worse by the second. Kenny could hardly contain his amusement as he watched from the window. He had to admit, it was a bit satisfying to see her finally get a taste of what it felt like to be uncomfortable in his space. But he knew things were about to get even more intense. Karen's scratching grew more frantic. She began yelling. "What the hell is going on?" she screamed. "Something's biting me! Something's in the water!" She splashed around in the pool, now clearly in distress. But no matter how much she tried to splash and sweat at her body, it only seemed to make things worse. The hives on her skin were spreading fast, and she was covered from head to toe in red, itchy welts. It was like a nightmare she couldn't escape. Panicking, Karen stumbled out of the pool and began running around the yard, scratching at her legs and arms with both hands. Her voice was shrill and frantic as she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "Help! There's something wrong with me! Something's attacking me!" she screamed into the phone. The operator, clearly confused but calm, instructed Karen to stay where she was. "We're sending someone out right now. Stay put and don't make it worse." But as the paramedics and police arrived, it was obvious that Karen wasn't under attack by anything other than the powder Kenny had put in the pool. She was a mess, red-faced, sweating, and covered in hives, scratching and yelling at anyone who came near. The paramedics quickly assessed the situation and gave her some antihistamines to stop the itching. But it was too late to escape the embarrassment. When the police officers asked what had happened, Karen tried to blame it on Kenny. "He did this to me. He poisoned the pool," she cried, pointing at the calm black man who was standing nearby, watching the chaos unfold. But no one was buying it. Kenny calmly explained what had happened and even showed them the footage of her trespassing, making racist comments, and ignoring all of his warnings. Karen's meltdown continued, but the officers had seen enough. They turned to her and calmly said, "Ma'am, you need to leave. You're trespassing, and you're not allowed to harass him anymore." And just like that, Karen's itchy nightmare ended with her finally getting what she deserved, arrested for trespassing, assaulting Kenny, and causing a scene in the neighborhood. Kenny watched with satisfaction as the officers led Karen away. It wasn't over yet, but it was one big step in the right direction. The sound of Karen's frantic yelling filled the yard as the paramedics tried to calm her down. But when the police officers arrived, it became clear they weren't going to let her make any more excuses. "Ma'am, what happened here?" one of the officers asked, looking at the red, itchy mess that Karen had become. Karen wasted no time blaming Kenny. "He did this to me," she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger toward him. "He poisoned the pool. This is all his fault." The officers exchanged skeptical glances but listened as Karen continued her rant. She told them her side of the story, how she had been a victim of Kenny's rage, and how she was just trying to relax in the community pool. She even started crying dramatically, as though she were the one who had been wronged. But Kenny wasn't rattled. He stayed calm, looking directly at the officers as he explained everything. "This woman has been trespassing on my property for weeks now," he said, his voice steady. "She's made racist comments, and I've asked her multiple times to leave. I have security footage to prove it." He pulled out his phone and showed the officers the videos he had taken, videos where Karen made cruel remarks about Kenny's race, calling him a servant, and saying that people like him should be grateful. The footage also showed her lounging by his pool, acting like she owned the place. The officers glanced at each other. They'd seen plenty of crazy stories in their line of work, but this one was different. Karen's behavior was caught on tape, and her complaints about the poison pool just didn't add up. "Ma'am," the officer said, turning to Karen, "you're on private property. You don't have permission to be here. You've been trespassing." Karen's face turned a bright shade of red, but she wasn't done yet. Furious and humiliated, she threw her hands up in the air. "This is ridiculous. You're siding with him?" she snapped. "I was just relaxing. He's a liar." In a fit of anger, Karen did something that no one expected. She punched Kenny, right in the arm. It was a weak, desperate punch, but it was enough to show her true colors. Before Kenny could even react, the officers stepped in. One of them quickly grabbed Karen's arm and placed her under arrest. "You're under arrest for assault and trespassing," the officer said firmly. Karen tried to argue, but it was no use. She was handcuffed and led away, still shouting that she was the real victim. "This isn't over. You'll regret this," she screamed as the officers put her in the back of the squad car. But no one was listening anymore. The neighborhood had seen Karen's true nature, and Kenny had finally gotten the justice he deserved. As the car pulled away, Kenny felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had stood up for himself, and now the law was on his side. With Karen finally out of his life for good, Kenny could finally breathe easy. He walked back into his house and took a moment to relax, enjoying the quiet after the chaos. No more racially charged comments. No more trespassing. No more stress. The news of Karen's arrest quickly spread through the neighborhood. Some of the neighbors who had been too afraid or unsure to speak up before now came to Kenny's door with apologies. "I should have said something sooner," one of them said. "I didn't realize she was causing you so much trouble." Kenny smiled and accepted their apologies. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just glad that people were finally seeing Karen for who she really was, a bully who had pushed him too far. Later that day, Kenny sat by his pool with a cold drink in hand. He gazed at the water, finally able to enjoy it without the threat of Karen barging in. He had taken the high road, handling the situation with patience and wisdom. It wasn't violence or aggression that had won him this peace. It was karma and a little bit of clever thinking. As for Karen? Well, she wouldn't be showing up uninvited anywhere anytime soon. Not only had she been arrested, but word had gotten around about her behavior. She was now known as the woman who had tried to take over someone else's property, and had ended up humiliated. Kenny chuckled to himself as he leaned back in his chair. Life had a way of working out when you stayed calm and didn't let people push you around. And for the first time in weeks, he felt completely at peace, knowing that Karen was out of his life for good.